Hello and welcome to this episode of AIC's training series. New videos will be added as they're completed, so please like and subscribe to be notified as they become available. And if you have additional questions about anything seen in the video, please feel free to comment. Okay, so today I'm going to show you an overview of PODs and TODs. So PODs are payable on death accounts and TODs are transfer on death accounts. I'm also going to touch on a couple of related topics. So up until the early 1900s, most courts ruled that a person couldn't open a bank account as the trustee for another person. Then a guy named William Totten went to court in New York in 1904, and they ruled that banks could have what were called tentative trusts, which became known as Totten trusts. Eventually, more and more states adopted this ruling. Most of the states call them PODs. There are some states that call them other things, but they all evolved from these Totten trusts. So a POD allows a person to open an account, name themselves as the trustee of the account, and then name somebody else a beneficiary. So what this does is it allows the account owner to retain control so they can spend the money, move money in and out of the account, and the beneficiary has no rights to the account as long as the owner's still alive. Now, originally, only bank accounts and some savings bonds could pass to beneficiaries using this POD arrangement. Then in the 1980s, there was new legislation that opened the arrangement to other types of assets like CDs and securities. Now, when the accounts are not set up on bank accounts or savings bonds, they're usually called TODs, or transfer on death accounts. So a TOD, or transfer on death account, are associated with brokerage accounts and securities like stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Now, every state except for Louisiana and Texas have passed TOD legislation. So not available in Louisiana or Texas, at least as of this video. The TOD works like the POD in that there's a named beneficiary and the assets pass to that person upon the death of the account holder, who's also the trustee. So whether it's a TOD or POD, just understand that the owner keeps full control of the assets until death. Now, as soon as they die, then the beneficiary presents proof of death, and the assets immediately transfer to the beneficiary without going through probate. Additionally, PODs allow a person to increase the amount on their covered by the FDIC on their bank accounts to 1.25 million. The reason this happens is you can have 5 accounts, and as long as the beneficiaries are different on each account, then each one can be covered up to $250,000, which at 5 accounts adds up to 1.25 million. So starting a POD or a TOD account is very easy. A person just has to fill out a simple form to establish one, and the form comes from the institution where the asset is held. And a lot of times it can even be done online. Now, if there's already a named beneficiary on the account, like with IRAs and workplace retirement accounts like 401s, those are already considered TODs. So since they're already TODs, the client doesn't need to fill out a separate form for that. And if they're thinking about filling out a separate form, they really need to check with the institution where that asset is held, just to make sure they don't screw things up by filling one out. So the main reason that people like PODs and TODs is to bypass probate. So what exactly is probate and why do we care? Well, probate is a legal process which means that lawyers, judges, the courts are all involved. There's paperwork and fees that are taken out of the estate. So probate itself is used to show that a will is valid, to inventory and appraise the estate, to pay off any debts and taxes, and then to distribute the estate. Now, if the individual is intestate, which means they didn't set up a will, then the court will direct the division of the estate. There's a site on the internet called NOLO, or NOLO, and you can find charts that show who gets what in your state when a person dies intestate. So this whole process can be very expensive and very time consuming. So if you avoid probate, you avoid all of this. However, just bypassing probate does not eliminate taxes, creditors' rights, and the rights of the family to inherit. This means that even if the accounts are POD or TOD, creditors and the government can make claims against them. Also, if the account is held in a community property state, the spouse can claim half of the assets unless the assets were acquired before marriage or were inherited. There are some other problems with PODs and TODs to be aware of. So the first is the POD or TOD takes precedence over a will. That means that the POD or TOD may contradict the wishes of the will, in which case the POD or the TOD wins. What can happen is this can lead to an unequal division of assets. So for example, the will says split the estate evenly. Well, if there's a POD or TOD, that will go to the beneficiary first, and then the remaining estate will be divided evenly, which means that the beneficiary of the POD or TOD will get more than the other beneficiaries. So the second thing is you can't change the beneficiary. Also, there is no contingent. So what happens if the beneficiary is dead and there's no contingent? Well, the asset just goes back to the estate anyway. If the person who has the TOD or POD does want a different beneficiary, they basically have to start a new account. If you're going to do that, or if the client's going to do that, make sure they work with the financial institution to make sure that the law is being followed and it works the way they want it to. Now, POD accounts can have more than one beneficiary, but some states only allow for equal distributions of assets from them. So the account holder should check first if they want something other than an equal portion. All right, so if the TOD has multiple beneficiaries, well, those are on non-monetary assets, so dividing non-monetary assets can certainly be challenging. Also, another problem is if the beneficiary is receiving financial help like SSI or Medicaid, inheriting that POD or TOD may disqualify them from receiving those benefits. Another thing to be aware of is property settlements in divorces may not revoke the POD. And if a person becomes incapacitated or incompetent, that money that's in that POD or TOD may not be available to the living caretakers to actually spend it to take care of this person. And if everything's tied up in PODs and TODs, there may not be enough money left in the estate upon death to take care of any final expenses or other arrangements. There also may not be enough left in the estate to pay for a specific bequest, like if, say, you wanted to leave money to the church or the scouts or something. So there's a liquidity issue. All right, so something that is occasionally confused with a POD or TOD is something called an ITF account or an in trust for account. And although these are also designed to bypass probate, they actually establish a trust relationship with the beneficiary. That means that the beneficiary has equitable ownership of that account. That means the money was basically given to the beneficiary when the account was opened, not upon death. Therefore, the account owner no longer has an equitable interest in the account. So if your financial institution is trying to say, or trying to tell you to do an ITF instead of a POD or TOD, just be aware that there's a different relationship there. Okay, so that is PODs and TODs. Hope that cleared up some of the confusion around them. If you have any other questions, please feel free to comment, and thanks for watching.